The lie of the grand hall was its light. It was a gilded, calculated warmth, poured from 1,000 candles suspended in constellations of iron and crystal, a light that promised life in a place that had outgrown the need for it. It was a light that did not touch King Theron. He sat upon the obsidian throne, a figure carved from midnight and stillness, the candlelight seeming to bend around the edges of his sovereign silhouette rather than daring to illuminate him. For 5 centuries, he had ruled this kingdom of eternal twilight, and for 5 centuries, he had been a monument, impassive, immutable, a constant against the shifting tides of mortal and immortal alike. Elara stood near the dais, just within the shadow of a colossal marble pillar. Her official position was Keeper of the Royal Archives, a title that was both grand and utterly mundane. It meant she was a glorified librarian, a custodian of histories written in blood and bound in human skin. But unofficially, she was an observer. A ghost in the machine of the court. She watched the sycophants and the schemers, the ancient vampires whose boredom had curdled into malice, and the nervous human envoys who smelled of their own fleeting heartbeats. And she watched the king. She watched him now. His face, a masterpiece of ageless beauty that art could only aspire to, was a mask of placid control. But she had learned to read the nuances the way she read fading ink on brittle parchment. The slight tension in the line of his jaw as the ambassador from the Sunstone Federation droned on about trade tariffs. The way his long, elegant fingers rested on the arm of the throne, not curled in anger, but lying perfectly still in a display of patience so profound it was its own form of threat. He was listening, but he was not present. A part of him was always elsewhere, adrift in the vast, lonely ocean of his own existence. It was this she felt, more than saw. A loneliness so absolute it had the density of a collapsed star. Tonight, the air was different. Thicker. A low hum of anxiety vibrated beneath the polished marble floors, a frequency only the truly attentive could feel. The Federation ambassador, a pompous, sweating man named Lord Vorlag, was pushing too hard. His demands were insults veiled in diplomatic language, his tone a razor's edge from open contempt. The silver sigil of his house, a stylized sunburst, gleamed on his chest, a deliberate provocation in a court of the night. Elara's own heart, a frantic, fragile drum, beat a counter-rhythm to the hall's strained silence. She felt a prickle on her skin, the kind that precedes a lightning strike. Her gaze swept the upper galleries, the shadowed alcoves where guards stood like statues. It was a practiced, nervous habit. She saw nothing, and yet she felt everything. An unseen pressure, a tightening knot in the tapestry of the evening. Vorlag finished with a flourish, his voice echoing in the sudden, cavernous silence. The Federation requires an answer, Your Majesty. Our patience, unlike your reign, is not eternal. A collective intake of breath, sharp and sibilant, hissed through the court. An unforgivable insult. Elara's eyes snapped back to the throne. Theron did not move. He did not blink. He simply let the silence stretch, letting Vorlag's audacity hang in the air until it began to rot. When he finally spoke, his voice was not loud, but it filled every corner of the hall, a low, resonant sound like the tolling of a deep bell. Your Federation, he began, each word a perfectly polished stone, seems to mistake desperation for leverage. You will have your answer when I have finished contemplating the sheer scale of your impertinence. It was then that Elara saw it. A flicker of movement in the gallery to the king's left. Not a guard. A shadow detaching itself from other shadows. A glint, not the warm, friendly gold of the candles, but a cold, predatory white. Silver. Time did not slow. It shattered. The world fractured into 1,000 sharp-edged moments. The glint became the barrel of a crossbow, small and wickedly efficient. The ambassador's smug face, contorting in a triumphant sneer. He was a diversion. The king, his attention fixed on Vorlag, a predator focused on his chosen prey, unaware of the hunter in the rafters. Elara's mind was a silent scream. There was no time to shout a warning. The distance was too great, the action too swift. The guards were statues, caught in the same tableau of shock as everyone else. The assassin was a professional, the timing was perfect. She was not a warrior. She was a scholar. Her hands were stained with ink, not blood. Her body was soft, her bones breakable. But in that fractured moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the immense, gravitational pull of the lonely figure on the throne. What mattered was that the thought of that profound stillness being violently broken was an obscenity she could not permit. She did not think. She acted. Her legs, propelled by a force she didn't know she possessed, carried her forward. 3 steps. An impossible distance. The world blurred into streaks of candlelight and astonished faces. She heard a gasp, it might have been her own. She saw the king's head finally turn, his crimson eyes widening, not in fear, but in stark, utter confusion as he saw her moving toward him. The thwomp of the crossbow string was a dull, final sound, like a closing book. Ilara launched herself across the last few feet of marble, a clumsy, desperate leap. She did not aim for grace. She aimed for him. Her body collided with the side of the throne, with the unyielding shape of his leg, her arms thrown wide as if to embrace the danger itself. And then, fire. A searing, white-hot agony erupted in her shoulder. It was not a cut or a tear. It was an annihilation. A point of impact that burned with a venomous, chemical cold. The silver. It felt like it was dissolving her from the inside out, every nerve screaming in a chorus of pure, undiluted pain. The force of it threw her sideways. Her head struck the stone arm of the throne with a sickening crack. The gilded light of the hall splintered into a kaleidoscope of pain, and then, mercifully, it began to dim. The last thing she saw was his face. The mask was gone. Shattered. In its place was a look of such raw, primordial shock that it eclipsed her own pain. It was the look of a mountain witnessing the sky fall. And in the depths of his ancient eyes, she saw something she had never seen there before, something she had only ever felt from a distance. A flicker. Not of anger. Not of fury. It was terror. The king of the vampires, the immortal monarch of the gloom, looked terrified. And his terror was for her. The darkness took her then, a soft, welcoming velvet that smelled of dust and old paper and the faint, metallic tang of her own blood. The silence in the hall lasted for a single, suspended heartbeat. It was the silence of a universe holding its breath. Then, that universe exploded. Theron did not register the screams of the courtiers, the clash of steel as his royal guard finally surged into motion, or the panicked shouts from the gallery. His entire world had collapsed into the small, crumpled form at his feet. Ilara. Her name was a shard of glass in his mind. He was moving before he was conscious of the decision, his body flowing from the throne with a speed that defied the laws of physics. He was beside her, his hand hovering over the wound in her shoulder, a wound that was not bleeding as it should. Instead, the flesh around the embedded silver bolt was blackening, sizzling with a faint, ghostly smoke. The silver was poison, a cancer spreading through her mortal veins with terrifying speed. A roar tore itself from his throat. It was not a sound of this world. It was an ancient, predatory rage, the fury of a god whose sanctuary had been defiled. The very air in the hall grew cold, the candle flames guttering as if in a gale. The vampires in the court fell to their knees, cowed by the sheer, untempered force of his power. The humans simply fainted. His crimson gaze, burning now with the light of a dying star, lifted from Ilara's form and found the ambassador. Vorlag stood frozen, his face a mask of triumphant horror, the realization of what he had unleashed dawning too late. "You," Theron breathed, and the word was a death sentence. He did not need to cross the floor. He was simply there, his hand clamped around Vorlag's throat, lifting the sputtering man from his feet. The ambassador's silver sunburst sigil sizzled against Theron's skin, a minor annoyance, a wasp sting to a leviathan. Bones creaked under the pressure of his grip. "Did you think," Theron's voice was a low, lethal whisper against the man's ear, "that my life was the one you were threatening?" Vorlag's eyes bulged. He tried to speak, to beg, but no sound could escape. Theron watched the life drain from the man's face, the frantic terror giving way to the slack-jawed emptiness of death. But it brought him no satisfaction. It was a hollow, meaningless gesture. A distraction. He let the body drop to the marble with a wet, final thud. His guard had already apprehended the assassin, a grim-faced man who met the king's gaze with a fanatic's resolve. Theron would deal with him later. He would unmake him, piece by piece, until he learned every secret he held. But not now. Now, all that mattered was the fading warmth on the floor beside his throne. He was back at her side in an instant. He gathered her into his arms, his movements impossibly gentle for a being of his strength. She was so light. A fragile collection of bone and breath that had thrown itself in the path of his own destruction. Her head lolled against his chest, her hair, the color of rich earth, spilling over his dark tunic. The scent of her blood, mingled with the cloying sweetness of her perfume and the acrid burn of the silver, filled his senses. It was a scent of sacrifice. A scent of endings. No, he whispered, the word a raw thing in the sudden quiet of the hall. He looked down at her face, pale as milk in the candlelight, a thin trickle of blood from the cut on her temple tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. Her stillness was a terrifying mimicry of his own. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the cowering court. Ileana, he commanded, his voice shaking with a tremor that had not been heard in centuries. An ancient vampire, her face a web of fine lines that spoke of millennia, not mere centuries, detached herself from the crowd. She was the court physician, a healer whose knowledge stretched back to the dawn of their kind. She hurried forward, her own composure rattled. "Your Majesty," she began, her eyes falling on the wound. She recoiled slightly. "Silver. Fix her," Theron ordered. It was not a request. It was a command issued to the universe itself. Ileana knelt, her long, pale fingers probing gently around the blackened flesh. "My king, my skills are with our blood, with the immortal frame. For a mortal, this poison, it works too fast. It burns the life from them. There is nothing I can do with conventional healing." Every word was a hammer blow against the fragile shield of his control. "Then find an unconventional way." He began to walk, carrying Ilara as if she were made of spun glass. He moved through the parting sea of his courtiers, their shocked and fearful faces a blur in his periphery. He left the chaos of the throne room behind, striding through the cold, echoing corridors of his own fortress. His home. A place that had not felt like one for longer than he could remember. He carried her to his private chambers, a suite of rooms high in the central spire, a place no one but he had entered in over 100 years. He laid her gently on the vast, velvet-covered bed, the deep burgundy of the fabric a stark contrast to her deathly pallor. The silver-fletched bolt stood out from her shoulder like a grotesque mockery of a flower. He knew, with a certainty that chilled his immortal soul, that to remove it would be to release the full, concentrated dose of its poison into her heart. To leave it was to let it eat away at her life, moment by agonizing moment. Ileana had followed him, her steps silent on the stone floors. She stood in the doorway, hesitant to cross the threshold into this sacred, lonely space. "My king," she said softly, her voice filled with a genuine sorrow that cut through his rage. "There are legends. Whispers from the old time. Rituals that defy the boundaries. But they are forbidden. They demand a price that no one has been willing to pay since the First Age." Theron did not turn to look at her. His gaze was fixed on Ilara's face, on the faint, shallow flutter of her chest. It was slowing. "Tell me," he said, his voice a dead, flat thing. "They speak of a tether," Ileana explained, her words careful, as if walking on broken glass. "A way to bind one life force to another. To walk the grey path, the space between the living world and the final death. To find a soul that is drifting away and guide it back." She paused, and the weight of that pause was immense. But to do so, the guide must offer a part of themselves to the void. A sacrifice of equivalence. To bring back a life, one must surrender a piece of their own. For an immortal, the price would be a piece of that immortality. A measure of your strength. A portion of your years. You would be diminished. Diminished. The word was an insult to everything he was. He was Theron, the unchanging, the eternal. His power was absolute, his reign unending. To sacrifice any part of that was to invite weakness, to court disaster. His enemies, both within his court and without, would sense it. The foundation of his power was its invulnerability. He looked at the woman on his bed. The quiet librarian. The one who watched him with eyes that held not fear, nor ambition, nor adoration, but a startling, unnerving understanding. The one who saw the loneliness he draped in sovereignty. The one who had, without hesitation, chosen to stand between him and a death that would have been, at worst, an inconvenience. She had offered her entire, fragile, fleeting existence to save him from a moment of pain. What was a piece of an endless existence compared to the entirety of a finite one? The calculation was simple. The answer was immediate. The king in him, the cold, calculating monarch, screamed in protest. It was illogical. Unwise. A foolish, sentimental act that could destabilize an entire kingdom for the sake of one mortal. But the man, the being that existed beneath the crown, the one who had been entombed in loneliness for 1,000 years, did not care. He finally turned to face Ileana, and his eyes were clear, the inferno of his rage banked to a single, focused point of unwavering resolve. "Prepare the ritual chamber," he said. "And bring me the oldest texts. I will walk the grey path. And I will not be returning alone." The ritual chamber was deep in the foundations of the castle, a place of cold, sleeping stone and absolute silence. It was a perfect circle, the walls unmarked by any torch sconce, the air utterly still and devoid of scent. Theron had not set foot in this place since his ascension, and the magic that slumbered here felt alien and heavy, like the pressure of the deep ocean. Ileana had worked swiftly. A circle of powdered silver and crushed obsidian shimmered on the floor, inscribed with runes that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. They were characters from a language so ancient it had no name, the language of creation and unmaking. At the center of the circle, on a bier of black stone, lay Ilara. She was paler now, her breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. The black veins of the silver's poison had spread, a dark web creeping from her shoulder across her chest, a map of her own demise. Theron stood before her, stripped to the waist, his own skin seeming to drink the oppressive darkness of the chamber. Ileana had painted similar runes onto his chest in a paste of blood and ash. They felt cold against his skin, a chilling premonition of the void he was about to enter. "The texts are clear, my king." Ileana's voice was a strained whisper from the edge of the circle. She would be his anchor, the one voice in the living world he might be able to hear. "You must establish the tether first. Find the thread of her life, what little remains, and bind it to your own. You will feel her pain. You must endure it. Then, and only then, can you follow the thread into the grey." He nodded, his jaw tight. He knelt beside the bier, his hands hovering over Ilara. He could feel the life draining from her, a steady, inexorable tide pulling out to a silent sea. He closed his eyes, shutting out the physical world, and reached for her not with his hands, but with his will. It was like searching for a single flickering candle in a hurricane. His consciousness, vast and powerful, swept through the chamber, but her presence was a guttering, fading thing. He pushed deeper, past the agony of her physical body, past the failing organs and the poisoned blood. He searched for the core of her. The spark. The thing that was Ilara. He found it. A tiny, fragile ember of light, swirling on the edge of a great, dark precipice. It was faint, but it was there. He focused his entire being on that spark, extending a tendril of his own immortal, unquenchable life force. He wrapped it around her ember, a gentle, protective embrace. The moment the connection was made, her pain became his. It was a firestorm. The searing, venomous agony of the silver flooded his senses. It was a pain unlike any he had ever known. Physical wounds were trivial to him, knitting themselves closed in moments. But this was an attack on the very concept of life, a poison designed to unravel the tapestry of existence. It screamed through the tether, and he grit his teeth, his body rigid as he absorbed the torment that was killing her. This was the first test. If he could not endure her pain, he could not save her from it. He held fast, anchoring her spark to his own roaring flame, and weathered the storm. "The tether is established," he ground out, his voice hoarse. "I am going in. Be careful, my lord," Ileana cautioned. "The grey path is not a place. It is an absence. It will try to claim you. It feeds on memory, on purpose. Do not forget why you are there. Do not forget her." He took a deep breath that he did not need and let himself fall. There was no sensation of falling. There was only a letting go. The stone chamber dissolved. The feeling of his own body vanished. The pain receded, replaced by a profound and terrifying cold. It was the cold of absolute zero, a cold that leached warmth not from the body, but from the soul. He was in the grey. It was not grey. It was nothing. A void of featureless, colorless, soundless expanse. There was no up or down, no beginning or end. There was only the tether, a shimmering, silver-red cord of energy stretching out from his core into the oppressive emptiness. It was his only guide. His only purpose. He began to move, not by walking, but by pulling himself along the tether, hand over hand, like a lifeline in an empty sea. With every pull, the void seemed to push back, whispering insidious lies into the core of his being. You are eternal, it seemed to say, the voice not a sound but a feeling, a resonance in the nothingness. Why chain yourself to something so fleeting? Let her go. She is already gone. A single grain of sand on an infinite shore. He ignored it, focusing on the tether. He pulled himself onward. The silence deepened, pressing in on him. It was a silence that consumed thought. He felt his own memories begin to fray at the edges. The faces of his long-dead mortal family, the taste of his first kill, the weight of the crown upon his head, they became distant, like stories read in a book long ago. Your power, the void whispered, its voice more seductive now. You are a king. A god. This sacrifice will make you less. It will make you weak. Is she worth the crumbling of your empire? Is anyone being worth such a price? He faltered. The king in him, the ancient, prideful monarch, listened to that question. Was she? He saw his throne room, his enemies circling. He saw his power, the very thing that defined him, bleeding away into this nothingness. Then, through the tether, he felt a flicker. A memory that was not his own. He saw a dusty room filled with the scent of old paper. Sunlight streaming through a high, arched window. A young girl with ink-stained fingers, her face alight with wonder as she traced the lines of a map of a long-lost kingdom. He felt her quiet joy, her insatiable curiosity, her profound love for the stories that lived in the silent, sleeping books. It was her memory. Her life. Flowing back to him through the tether. He pulled harder, a renewed sense of urgency burning away the void's cold logic. He was flooded with more of her. The taste of a fresh-baked pastry in a bustling market. The feeling of cool rain on her face during a summer storm. The quiet satisfaction of mending a broken book spine. The nervous, fluttering beat of her heart the first time she had been summoned to the king's presence. And he felt her watching him. Not with fear, but with a deep, empathetic sorrow. She saw the loneliness he thought he had hidden so well. She saw the weight of his endless years. Her sacrifice had not been for a king. It had been for a prisoner. She saw me, he realized. The thought was a clarion call in the silence. She saw me. The void shrieked, its seductive whispers turning into a hostile roar. It threw visions at him, his kingdom in flames, his throne usurped, his name forgotten. It showed him an eternity of weakness and regret. He ignored it all. He could see her now, at the end of the tether. Her spark. It was no longer a tiny ember but a translucent, shimmering form of herself, curled in on herself, drifting toward a swirling vortex of absolute blackness, the final death. He reached the end of the line, his own spectral form solidifying in the nothingness. He was before her. She looked peaceful, her face free of pain. She was letting go. Ilara, he said, and his voice was a real sound in this soundless place. It was the first true thing the void had ever known. Her form stirred. Her eyes, hazy and unfocused, opened. She looked at him, and a faint, sad smile touched her lips. It's you, her thoughts echoed, not in words, but in feeling. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe for you. I am not leaving without you, he stated. It was an unbreakable vow. It's so peaceful here, she thought, her form becoming more transparent as the vortex pulled at her. No more pain. No more fear. It's time to rest. Your rest is not here, he said, reaching for her, his hand closing around her ethereal arm. It is in the sun on your face. In the scent of old books. In the life that you have barely begun to live. You did not give me your life so that I could let you throw it away. He pulled. She resisted, the lure of the peaceful oblivion strong. You chose to stand for me, he insisted, his voice raw with an emotion he could not name. Now you must let me stand for you. Come back, Ilara. Come back with me. He poured his own memories into her, a torrent of his long, lonely existence. He showed her the world through his eyes, the birth and death of stars, the rise and fall of mountains, the endless, repeating cycle of human ambition and folly. He showed her the crushing weight of watching everything he had ever known turn to dust, again and again and again. He showed her the prisoner in the gilded cage. So lonely, her thought whispered, full of a pain that was for him, not for herself. Yes, he admitted. And in that one word, he laid his entire soul bare. Come back. And I will not be lonely anymore. That was the key. The plea. The truth. Her resistance ceased. She turned her face from the vortex and looked at him, her eyes clearing. A single, shimmering tear traced a path down her spectral cheek. She reached out and took his hand. The moment she did, the tether blazed with the light of a newborn sun. The void recoiled, screaming in fury and pain. Theron held her hand, held it tight, and began to pull them both back along the glowing cord, away from the endless, hungry dark. The journey back was a brutal fight. The void clung to them, trying to rip them apart, to strip away their identities. But their joined hands were an anchor, their shared purpose a shield. He protected her with his strength, and she, in turn, protected him with her fierce, mortal hope. He felt the price being exacted. A deep, resonant part of his power was being siphoned away, flowing out of him into the void as payment. He felt a fraction of his immortality flaking off, like dust from an ancient statue. He felt the foundations of his being tremble as a measure of his eternal life was consumed. He was becoming less of a god, less of a monument. He did not care. He held her hand and pulled them toward the pinprick of light that was the living world. He felt the cold stone of the chamber floor before he saw it. The sensation of his own body returned with a jarring rush, bringing with it the echoes of her agony. He gasped, a real, lung-searing gasp, and his eyes flew open. He was kneeling beside the bier. The runes on his chest were gone, burned away. He felt, hollowed out, drained. A profound exhaustion settled into his bones, an exhaustion of the soul that he had not felt in 1,000 years. He felt mortal. He looked at Ilara. The black, creeping veins of the poison were receding. The unnatural pallor of her skin was giving way to a faint, human flush. The wound in her shoulder was closing, the silver bolt pushed out by regenerating flesh to clatter onto the stone floor, its power spent. A soft groan escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered. Then, slowly, they opened. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, were clouded with confusion at first. They roamed the dark chamber before finally settling on his face. She stared at him, at his bare chest, at the weariness that was carved into his features. "My lord," she whispered, her voice a dry, rasping thing. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He couldn't speak. The words were trapped behind a wall of overwhelming, suffocating relief. He simply reached out, his hand trembling slightly, an indignity he had never before experienced, and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. His touch was hesitant, reverent. Her eyes widened as she felt his skin. It was not the icy cold of an immortal. It was cool, yes, but there was a current of warmth beneath it. A warmth that had not been there before. She saw the change in him then. It was in the slight tremor of his hand, in the profound exhaustion in his eyes, in the way the candlelight now seemed to touch him, to cling to the lines of his face instead of shying away. The monument was gone. A man knelt in its place. She started, her voice faltering. "I am here," he said, and his voice was different, too. Quieter. Less resonant. More real. He had fought death itself. He had journeyed into the endless nothing and wrestled her soul from its grasp. He had paid a price that would forever alter him. And as he looked at her, at the life returning to her eyes, he knew, with a certainty that dwarfed all the knowledge of his long existence, that he had not been diminished. He had been made whole. The weeks that followed were a quiet, fragile truce with reality. Ilara's recovery was slow, not because of the wound, which had vanished without a scar, but because of the journey her soul had taken. She slept for long stretches, and when she was awake, she was often lost in thought, her gaze distant, as if she could still see the edges of the grey path flickering in her periphery. Theron did not leave her side. He dismissed the court, cancelled all audiences, and sealed himself and Ilara within his private spire. The kingdom could run itself for a time, it had before. His entire world had been reduced to the four walls of these chambers and the steady, returning rhythm of her breathing. He had Ileana bring her meals, broths, and teas that smelled of earth and herbs. He himself would sit in a chair by her bed, a book open in his lap, though he never turned a page. He was simply watching her, guarding her sleep, as if the void might try to reclaim her if he looked away. The changes in him were undeniable. He felt the absence of the power he had sacrificed like a missing limb. His senses, while still far beyond a mortal's, were no longer godlike. He could not hear the heartbeat of a guard at the bottom of the spire. He could not taste the provenance of the wine in the cellars. The profound, ancient stillness within him had been replaced by something new, a quiet current of feeling. He felt the chill of the morning air. He felt a pang of hunger, a ghost of a sensation he hadn't experienced in centuries. He felt the passage of time not as an abstract concept, but as a series of moments, each one precious. One afternoon, Ilara woke to find him standing by the window, looking out at the perpetually overcast sky that blanketed his domain. He was not wearing his royal finery, but a simple black tunic and trousers. Without the armor of his station, he looked younger, more vulnerable. "They are talking, aren't they?" she said, her voice stronger than it had been. He turned, a faint, surprised look on his face. "The court?" he asked. "The court is always talking. It is the sound of their ambition fermenting. They are talking about you. And about me," she clarified, pushing herself up against the pillows. A wave of dizziness made her pause. "They are saying you are weakened. That you sacrificed a part of your power for a human librarian." He walked over to the bed and sat on its edge, his movements careful. "What they say is true." There was no shame in his admission, only a quiet statement of fact. "Why?" she asked, the question that had been haunting her waking moments. "My life, it is nothing compared to the security of the throne. To you." He looked at her, and his crimson eyes held a sincerity that stole her breath. "You are wrong," he said softly. "You saw a man who had forgotten he was anything but a king. You reminded him. You did not give your life for my throne. You offered it for me. There is a difference. A difference I had not understood for a very long time." He reached out and took her hand. His skin was cool, but his grip was firm, grounding. "Ileana told me that the sacrifice had to be one of equivalence. A life for a life. But the void is a cheat. It did not take a life from me. It took a prison. It took an eternity of solitude and left me with," this he squeezed her hand gently, "the ability to feel the warmth of another's touch." Ilara's heart ached with a feeling so immense she could not name it. It was gratitude, and awe, and a terrifying, burgeoning affection. She had stepped in front of a crossbow bolt out of a sense of profound, instinctual duty to a figure she pitied and respected. He had torn a hole in the fabric of reality for her. The scales of their exchange were impossibly, beautifully unbalanced. "Rest," he said, releasing her hand. "The world can wait. For now, there is only this room." And for a time, it was true. Their world was an island. He would read to her from her favorite histories, his voice, though less booming, giving new life to the old words. She, in turn, would ask him questions about the past, not as a historian interviewing a source, but as a friend. She learned of his mortal life, of a boy who loved to watch the stars, of a young man who had been terrified of the immortality thrust upon him. He spoke of his long-lost family with a wistful sadness he had never before allowed himself to feel, let alone express. In these quiet conversations, the last of the emotional barriers between them crumbled to dust. He was not King Theron, the Obsidian monarch. He was just Theron. And she was not the keeper of the archives. She was Ilara. But the world could not be kept at bay forever. 6 days after she had awoken, a tremor ran through the castle. Not a physical one, but a shift in the political landscape. Lord Valerus, Theron's cousin and a vampire of ancient lineage and even more ancient ambition, had called a meeting of the Elder Council. The summons was a direct challenge to the king's authority. Ileana brought the news, her face grim. "He is using this, my king. He is spreading whispers that your judgment is compromised. That you have been weakened by sentiment. He claims you have endangered the kingdom for a mortal pet." Ilara, who was sitting by the fire, wrapped in a velvet robe, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. She was the weapon being used against him. Her act of loyalty had become his liability. Theron listened, his face impassive, but Ilara could see the tension in his shoulders. The old king was still there, the strategist, the ruler. He is a fool, Theron said calmly. His ambition has always outstripped his intellect. He sees weakness, but he does not understand its source. He thinks I am a damaged sword, not one that has been reforged. He has support, sire, Ileana warned. Many of the old houses are restless. They fear this change in you. They fear what they do not understand, Theron countered. He stood and walked to Ilara, holding out his hand. It is time the court feared it as well. Ilara looked at his outstretched hand. What are you doing? I am attending a meeting of my council, he said, a faint, dangerous smile playing on his lips. And you are coming with me. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They will see me as the cause of all this. The human who brought their king low. No, he said, his gaze unwavering. They will see you as the woman who showed their king what is truly worth protecting. They will see our strength. She placed her hand in his. His strength flowed into her, not the overwhelming power of a god, but the steady, resolute strength of a man who knew exactly what he was fighting for. The council chamber was a place of oppressive grandeur, designed to intimidate. A great, circular table of polished obsidian dominated the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs that resembled thrones in their own right. The air was thick with tension and the scent of old blood and older malice. When Theron entered, with Ilara at his side, a wave of shock rippled through the assembled vampires. They had expected him to come alone, perhaps to answer their challenge. They had not expected him to bring the very evidence of his supposed folly with him. Lord Valerus sat at the head of the table, a position he had presumptuously taken. He was handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way, his smile a predator's baring of teeth. He rose slowly, his eyes, the color of frozen blood, fixed on Ilara. Your Majesty, Valerus said, his voice dripping with false deference. We are grateful you could join us. Though I must confess, we had not anticipated you would bring a guest. This is a matter for the immortal rulers of this kingdom. Ilara is here at my invitation. Theron's voice was quiet, yet it cut through the murmuring. Her presence is not only welcome, it is necessary. As she seems to be the subject of your concern. He did not take a seat. He stood at the foot of the table, Ilara still beside him, their joined hands a silent testament to their unity. They were an island in a sea of hostility. My concern, Valerus said, circling the table like a wolf, is for the throne. For the stability of our entire race. We have heard troubling tales, Theron. That you engaged in a forbidden ritual. That you bled your own power, a power that belongs to the crown, to save a single, insignificant human life. He gestured to Ilara with a dismissive flick of his wrist. Is it true? It is, Theron said without hesitation. A gasp went through the room. Valerus's smile widened. He had his confession. Then you admit it. You have weakened yourself. You have endangered us all. For what? For sentiment. For a pet. The insult was a physical blow. Ilara flinched, but Theron's grip on her hand tightened, holding her steady. I have not weakened myself, Valerus, Theron said, his gaze sweeping over the council members, meeting each of their eyes in turn. I have merely exchanged one kind of power for another. For centuries, I have ruled you through fear. Through the promise of my unassailable, eternal strength. I was a symbol. A monument. And you all grew complacent in my shadow, believing that strength was all that mattered. He took a step forward, his presence seeming to grow, not with magical force, but with the weight of his conviction. But strength without purpose is a blunt instrument. I ruled a kingdom of the lonely and the bored. A kingdom of ghosts, haunted by the past. I had forgotten what it was we were protecting. He turned his gaze to Ilara, and the tenderness in his expression was so profound, so open, that it silenced the room. This woman, this insignificant human, reminded me. She did not throw her life away for a crown. She threw it away for a man she believed was worth saving. She showed me a loyalty that none of you, in your endless centuries of plotting and scheming, have ever understood. She reminded me that a life, any life, is not a currency to be spent, but a fire to be guarded. He looked back at Valerus, his eyes now hard as diamonds. You see my sacrifice as a loss. I see it as an investment. I did not lose power. I focused it. The power I gave to the void was the power of isolation. Of cold, empty eternity. In its place, I have gained this. He lifted his and Alara's joined hands. Connection. Purpose. A reason to rule, not just to reign. I am stronger now than I have ever been, for I am no longer fighting for a throne. I am fighting for a future. Silence. A deep, profound silence filled the chamber. The council members looked from Theron's passionate, transformed face to Valerus's sneering one. They saw their king, not diminished, but reborn. They saw a man who had found his soul. Valerus, seeing his support wavering, played his final, desperate card. This is madness. He speaks of sentiment and love. These are mortal frailties. He is no longer fit to be our king. He is human. He spat the word like a curse. But it had no power. It was Alara who spoke then, her voice clear and steady, ringing with a strength she didn't know she had. Is it a human frailty to value loyalty? Is it a mortal weakness to inspire a sacrifice born not of fear, but of devotion? You speak of power, Lord Valerus, but all you have is ambition. You covet a throne. She looked at Theron, her eyes shining, protects a home. Which of those do you believe is the greater strength? Her words hung in the air, a perfect, unassailable truth. The council members looked at each other. They saw the truth in her words. They saw the empty greed in Valerus's eyes and the profound, unwavering purpose in Theron's. They had been ruled by a monument for centuries. Now, for the first time, they were being led by a king. One by one, the elders of the council rose from their chairs and bowed their heads. Not in fear, as they once had, but in a new, deeper respect. The challenge was over. Valerus stood alone, his face pale with fury and disbelief. His power base had crumbled to dust before his eyes, defeated not by a show of force, but by a simple, undeniable truth. Theron looked at his cousin, a flicker of pity in his eyes. Your ambition has blinded you, Valerus. You may keep your life, but you are no longer welcome in this court. Go, and contemplate the difference between a ruler and a king. Valerus, stripped of his power and his pride, turned and stalked from the room without another word, his defeat absolute. The crisis had passed. The throne was secure. But the victory felt different from any Theron had ever known. It was not a victory of dominance, but of understanding. That night, Theron did not lead Alara back to his chambers. He led her up a winding staircase she had never seen before, a staircase that seemed to climb to the very top of the world. It ended at a heavy iron door, which he opened onto a windswept, open-air balcony at the highest point of the spire. The chill night air was sharp and clean. Below them, the castle and its surrounding lands stretched out, a tapestry of shadow and faint, distant lights. For the first time, Alara realized the perpetual cloud cover that she had always known had broken. And in the inky black sky, a billion stars glittered with a fierce, cold beauty. I haven't been up here in 300 years, Theron said, his voice quiet beside her. He leaned against the stone parapet, looking not at the kingdom below, but up at the celestial display. I used to come here when I was a boy. I dreamed of visiting those lights. They're beautiful, Alara breathed, mesmerized. I had forgotten, he said, a note of wonder in his voice. In the long twilight of my reign, I had forgotten that the stars were even there. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, sharing the immensity of the night sky. The great, political dramas seemed small and distant from this height. Here, there was only the wind, the stars, and the two of them. Finally, Alara turned to him. What you said in the council chamber, about fighting for a future. What did you mean? He turned to face her, the starlight catching in his eyes, making them gleam like dark jewels. He took both of her hands in his touch sending a current of warmth through her. My future was once a straight, unchanging line stretching into infinity. A road I walked alone. It was not a future. It was a sentence, he said, his voice low and intense. When I brought you back from the grey, I tied my life to yours. I do not know what that means, fully. I feel the years in a way I never have before. I feel the sun's eventual rise not as a threat, but as a promise of a new day. My future is no longer a straight line. It bends. It changes. It moves toward yours. He lifted a hand and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. Elara, you are my future. The one I choose. The one I will fight for. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of a joy so profound it was almost painful. And you are mine, she whispered. I think you always were. He leaned in, his movements slow, deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes as his lips met hers. The kiss was not one of fiery, desperate passion. It was a kiss of quiet revelation. It was soft, and tender, and full of unspoken promises. It was the taste of starlight and eternity, of mortal fragility and immortal devotion. It was the sealing of a bond forged in sacrifice and tempered in truth. It was the feeling of two solitudes finally, irrevocably, ending. When they broke apart, they rested their foreheads together, breathing the same cool night air. The wind whipped her hair across his face, and he smiled, a true, unguarded smile that transformed his entire countenance. In the east, the edge of the sky was beginning to lighten, a faint, pearlescent glow heralding the dawn. For any other vampire, it would be a signal to retreat, to seek the safety of the shadows. But Theron did not move. He kept his eyes on the horizon, a look of peaceful anticipation on his face. It's almost morning, Elara said softly, a note of concern in her voice. I know, he replied, his voice filled with a quiet wonder. I want to see it. He looked down at her, his smile deepening. I want to see it with you. And so they stood together, on the highest tower of the castle, and watched as the sun began its slow, magnificent ascent. They watched as the darkness bled into shades of violet and rose, and then into a brilliant, burning gold. The first rays of sunlight touched the land, chasing the shadows away, and for the first time in 500 years, the Vampire King did not flinch from its light. He welcomed it. He stood in the dawn of his new life, his hand held tightly in hers, no longer a monument of eternal twilight, but a man ready to embrace the promise of 1,000 sunrises to come.